Welcome to our channel, and today we are going to help you understand the paper, The Curious Case of Neural Text Degeneration. The paper, presented at ICLR 2020, explores the challenge of decoding strategies in neural language models for text generation. The authors, Ari Holtzman and colleagues from the University of Washington and the University of Cape Town, observe a paradoxical phenomenon where reliable language models trained on likelihood maximization are prone to producing degenerate text, uninteresting, incoherent, or repetitive, when using maximization-based decoding methods like beam search. The paper introduces nucleus sampling, a novel technique for generating higher quality text from language models. Nucleus sampling works by sampling from a nucleus of high probability tokens instead of the full distribution, which effectively cuts off the less reliable tail of the distribution that often leads to degeneration. They evaluate this approach against current strategies along several metrics, such as likelihood, diversity, and repetitiveness. Their experiments show that 1. Maximization is not a suitable decoding objective for open-ended text generation. 2. Language model distributions require tail truncation in generation for quality control. And 3. Nucleus sampling outperforms other methods in generating long text that is both high quality, judged by humans, and diverse like human-produced text. The context provided shows a nonsensical example generated by beam search and pure sampling, which emphasizes the issue of degenerative text and the need for better decoding algorithms. The text discusses the deficiency in the text generation of language models when using certain decoding methods. It highlights that common strategies like top-K sampling and beam search result in either repetitive, generic text or incoherent gibberish, respectively. To address these issues, the authors introduce nucleus sampling, a new technique that dynamically selects a range of probable words, the nucleus, for each next word prediction, which leads to more coherent and human-like text generation. Nucleus sampling differs from top-K sampling and temperature-controlled sampling by focusing on a portion of the probability mass to decide the pool of candidates, rather than a fixed range of most likely words or a skewed distribution. The paper compares traditional methods with nucleus sampling by examining properties like the likelihood of repetition and the complexity, perplexity of the generated text. It also implements human unified with statistical evaluation, HUO, to jointly assess the quality and diversity of the text outputs. The results show that nucleus sampling outperforms other methods and provides text that is closer to human writing in terms of both diversity and quality. The authors provide examples and additional material which can be found on their GitHub repository. The conference paper at ICLR 2020 discusses text generation and decoding strategies in neural language models. It addresses the issues with generation by maximization, which often produces text with high grammaticality but low diversity. While generative adversarial networks, GANs, have been a popular research area, studies have found that GANs do not outperform language models in producing both high-quality and diverse text. To improve diversity, researchers have proposed diverse beam search methods for neural dialogue systems, including scoring functions for diversity and constraints on beam hypotheses. The paper also distinguishes between open-ended and directed text generation tasks. Directed generation tasks, such as machine translation and summarization, often use encoder-decoder architectures with attention mechanisms and typically employ beam search, which is less problematic in terms of repetition due to the well-defined input-output relationship. On the other hand, open-ended text generation allows for more freedom in continuation, posing different challenges addressed in this work. Furthermore, the paper outlines the task of open-ended generation, where an input text passage is provided and the model must generate a coherent continuation. It explains the probability computation using a left-to-right decomposition for token generation. Decoding objectives for directed generation typically use maximization-based decoding, which seeks the continuation of text with the highest probability of following the given context. However, the text points out that there is still a need to choose an appropriate decoding strategy, noting that future work may combine solutions at both training and inference times. The text discusses two main topics: an environmental issue and a technical method in natural language processing. NLP. Environmental issue. Since 2008, there has been a significant rise in the number of young humpback whales becoming stranded on the West Australian coast, attributed to poor nutrition, as reported by veterinary researchers at the Australian Veterinary Association's annual conference. The stranding of calves entangled in nets at whaling stations has also been noted. The text mentions additional wildlife challenges, including a sharp decline in wild populations affecting species such as petrels, and accounts of multiple fin whales dying during storms and cyclones. With seabirds and seals on the move, an unusual migration of white bats and umidata is taking place across Australia. It has been reported that the count of stranded whales on the West Australian coast has risen by over 50% in the past year. The fate of one whale, found off the coast of Bundaberg, was confirmed when experts determined it had been struck by a fishing vessel. NLP method, nucleus sampling. The technical portion of the text introduces a new stochastic decoding method called nucleus sampling, proposed to address issues with existing text generation methods like beam search and maximization-based decoding, which often lead to low-quality, repetitive, or incoherent text. Nucleus sampling is based on selecting a set of tokens for sampling from a probability distribution of possible next tokens in a sequence. The method involves constructing a top P vocabulary, which is a subset of all possible tokens that cumulatively exceed a threshold probability, P. This approach is designed to produce more coherent and contextually appropriate text generation by avoiding problems observed with other methods. Please note that the text included some seemingly unrelated and possibly out-of-context elements, which were not summarized, focusing instead on the coherent parts of the provided content. This text appears to be an excerpt from a research paper presented at the ICLR 2020 conference. It discusses the relationship between the probability of a repeated phrase and the number of times it is repeated, where the likelihood of repetition increases, creating a positive feedback loop. This was found true for a wide range of phrases tested. The text also examines how the probability mass is distributed in partial human sentences. Flat distributions result in many tokens having moderate probabilities, whereas peaked distributions concentrate the probability into fewer tokens. This affects the choice of parameter k in top K sampling, a method used for selecting the next word in a sequence generated by a language model. High values of the parameter lead to sampling from a small, highly probable set of words, or the nucleus. Top K sampling itself is compared to another method called nucleus sampling, and both involve truncating the output distribution of a neural language model, but they differ in their truncation strategy. The document also explains how the top K sampling process works, including rescaling the distribution before sampling, and how the value of K at each step influences the generation process. Finally, the text suggests that finding an appropriate value for K is a challenge, as top K sampling can achieve higher quality text generation than other methods like beam search or sampling from the full distribution, but using a constant value for K may not be optimal. The text discusses issues related to text generation strategies in language models and presents a study on the Generatively Pre-trained Transformer 2, GPT-2 performance. It outlines the shortcomings of traditional top K sampling, where selecting a small set of probable next words K may lead to bland text, while a large K might include unsuitable words. To mitigate this, nucleus sampling is introduced, which dynamically adjusts the number of candidate words and improves the model's handling of context variability. Another method called temperature sampling modifies the probability distribution of word choices based on a temperature parameter. Lower temperature values bias the generation towards higher probability options, resulting in less diversity and a risk of repetitive loops. The study employs GPT-2, trained on the WebText dataset, to generate 5,000 text passages, assessing the relevance and diversity of the produced content. This relevance is measured via perplexity. The lower the perplexity, the closer the text is to human-like quality. However, the goal is not to minimize perplexity, but to match the perplexity of gold. Human-generated text to avoid the issues of low diversity and repetition. Nucleus sampling outperformed other strategies by achieving perplexity closest to that of human text. The experiments underscore the trade-offs between producing diverse generation and maintaining high-quality, contextually appropriate outputs. The text is an excerpt from a paper discussing different methods of text generation. It provides a comparison of various text decoding methods based on metrics such as perplexity, self-BLF4, zip coefficient, repetition percentage, and Hughes, a combined human and statistical evaluation. The table shows how these methods fare against the benchmark of human-generated text, with the closest to human performance being highlighted in bold. The paper suggests that natural language does not consistently aim to maximize probability, as shown by lower per-token probability in natural text compared to text generated by beam search. This is because human language tends to be more informative and less predictable, avoiding high-probability repetitions. This behavior is consistent with Grice's maxims of communication, which state that communicators avoid stating the obvious and aim for informative exchanges. For statistical evaluation, the paper analyzes the vocabulary distribution using Zipf's law, which indicates an inverse relationship between the rank of a word and its frequency in natural text. The Zipfian coefficient is used to assess the vocabulary distribution in the generated text. Overall, the paper highlights the complexity of human language and the limitations of current language models in replicating this complexity. It stresses the inadequacy of simply using larger models or improving neural architectures to address these challenges, as these approaches might not capture the informative and nuanced use of language found in human communication. The text appears to be a summary from a research paper presented at the International Conference on Learning Representations (ICLR) in 2020, discussing the differences between human-generated text and machine-generated text. Figure 7 in the paper presents a rank frequency plot revealing that both sampling and nucleus sampling methods produce text whose n-gram frequencies are much closer to the human text distribution compared to text generated by beam search, which significantly deviates from the natural language distribution. Different parameters for T, K, and P are listed, which likely relate to thresholds and values used in the different text generation methods. Figure 8 discusses self-BLU, a metric used to measure the diversity of text generated by stochastic decoding methods that incorporate randomness. Self-BLU is calculated by comparing each generated document with a set of other generated documents, where a lower self-BLU score indicates greater diversity. The text notes that commonly chosen values of T within 0.51 and K within 1/100 lead to high self-similarity, which is a signal of low diversity. Conversely, values of P within 0.91 are noted to match the human text distribution more closely. The rank frequency plot and the mention of vocabulary distributions suggest that pure sampling might overestimate the use of rare words, but closely align with human-like text construction. Ultimately, the paper seems to focus on analyzing how different text generation methods compare to human text and highlights the trade-offs between diversity and following human-like distributions of language. The text provides insights from a conference paper presented at ICLR 2020, focusing on text generation methods and their tendency to repeat phrases. It analyzes different decoding strategies and their inclination to get stuck in loops within the first 200 tokens, defining a loop as a phrase that repeats at least 3 times. The study indicates that when certain parameters, like temperature and top K values, are tuned properly, nucleus sampling is closest to human text in terms of avoiding repetition. However, too low values of these parameters lead to an increase in repetition, resembling a greedy search approach. Sampling with low temperatures also increases repetition unless very high temperatures are used, which then negatively impacts coherence. Additionally, the paper discusses human unified with statistical evaluation, HUSE, which combines human and statistical assessments to evaluate text generation quality. The method trains a discriminator that uses the probability assigned by the model and human judgments of text typicality. This combined approach aims to measure text coherence and diversity. Due to the truncation of the probability distribution in current decoding methods, initial Hughes scores were nearly 0. To mitigate this, the text used for Hughes evaluations interpolates the original probability distribution with the truncated one from top K and nucleus sampling. For their study, each decoding algorithm's output received 200 generations of annotations, with each generation receiving 20 annotations from different people, resulting in a total of 4,000 annotations. In summary, the paper evaluates the repetition issue in text generation methods and highlights that nucleus sampling performs well within typical parameter ranges. It also addresses the limitations of statistical evaluation in capturing text quality and coherence, presenting Hughes as a combined evaluation method that brings both human judgment and statistical measurement to assess the generated text's resemblance to human quality and diversity. The text is a summary of a research paper presented at a conference, ICLR 2020, focusing on different decoding schemes for open-ended language generation. The research investigates common decoding methods, identifying issues such as repetition and generic language with likelihood maximizing decoding and incoherent language with untruncated sampling methods. The researchers propose nucleus sampling as an effective solution to capture the confidence region of language models. They use a KNN classifier with k equals 13 neighbors to compute Hughes, a measure of utility, and found that nucleus sampling achieved the highest Hughes score, followed by top K sampling. Their qualitative analysis included examples of text generated by various methods, showing the pitfalls of each, such as repetition loops in beam search, incoherent output from full sampling, and unrelated digression in top K sampling. The paper also indicates future work directions, such as characterizing the region of confidence dynamically and augmenting the decoding process with a semantic utility function. The research received support from various organizations, including NSF, DARPA, the South African Center for Artificial Intelligence Research, and the Allen Institute for AI. References at the end cite related works contributing to the study of neural networks and language processing.